Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Well, in the history of the most popular sport on earth, only 62 of the hundreds of millions of men to have ever played the game of football have made it to 4 FIFA World Cups. And I'm proud to say that one of them, who also happens to be the 56th player to have ever captained the Socceroos, is my guest today on Greats with Garby. It's not a bad tagline to have attributed to you, Mark Milligan, is it?
No, not at all, and greatly appreciated that introduction.
Good to see you, mate. I know you're still gearing up for another season at MacArthur in the A-League, the upcoming campaign. Looking forward to that. But, you know, that line, 4 World Cups, are you at the stage now where you can still reflect on it a little bit and enjoy what you've achieved?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, probably since I retired, it's been a little bit tough because, you know, obviously the state that the world went into, you know, at the beginning of the year. And I guess it probably really hasn't hit home yet totally, simply because since my retirement, there unfortunately hasn't been a national team camp or game, and I think it'll all sort of hit home, you know, when I'm sort of sitting at home supporting the boys rather than, you know, being alongside them.
Keen to get into some of the stories from those World Cups and how you got there and the enormity of that achievement, because obviously it's a special one. But you're still playing, and MacArthur are the new team coming into the A-League. Of course, you are nearing the end, that's obvious, and you are transitioning into coaching, which we'll speak about as well. So as we get closer to a new season, do you still have the same sort of excitement that you had when you were a youngster coming through, or is it a different perspective on matters now?
No, I think there's definitely that excitement there, probably more so now than when you're younger. I guess when you're younger with a lot of things, you tend to take them for granted. You know, I think you start to appreciate what you've had and what you have as you get a little bit older. And, you know, while pre-season's never that much fun and they've never got any easier, you know, I'm very, very excited for the upcoming season, knowing that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to still be able to play and still be able to, you know, be a part of it. And I guess my body's allowed me to contribute. So, you know I have a lot of mates that have been in the game, and, you know, that the game's taken away from them. So I think in that sense, you know, I'm very appreciative of what I'm still able to do in terms of football.
Was that a key part of the discussion you had with Harry Kewell about playing on? What did he have to say, and how important were his words of encouragement in regards to that?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the conversations we had with Harry were, you know, a little bit earlier in the year, more around, you know, because he was obviously looking to go to Hibs and at one point, and, you know, I still have a lot of good relationships. I met a lot of fantastic people there, and obviously just in our conversations, you know, we started talking about that exact thing. You know, while you're fortunate enough to be able to play, you should definitely, you know, continue down that path. You know, it's you're a long time retired, and, you know, I've heard that for a long time, but you know, it's only sort of started to really make sense in, you know, the last year or two when you do, especially during this COVID period. I think it really made sense to me, and, you know, obviously they were big discussions I was having with my wife and, you know, people that are close to me. You know, whether it was just time with everything that was happening and stuff like that, just to, you know, to start to transition. But that was the main feeling. You know, it might not hurt so much now, but I think in a few years' time, when you look back and you think, gee, you know, I probably could have gone 1 more year or 2 more years or something. I think that's when, you know, regret starts to set in, and that's when I think it becomes hard as, you know, as retired footballers or retired athletes.
Exactly right, and that's why we're excited about the new A-League season coming in, because there's a new team coming into the competition, and you get to lead them, which will be fantastic, of course. How is it there at MacArthur? I mean, because of COVID, I don't think we've had as much of an insight into them, 6 weeks out from the season starting, as we would have usually had with a new team. But you've got Adam Federici in goals, massive get, some other big-name players, including Matt Derbyshire, who's played for Blackburn in the Premier League. Ante Milicic is your coach. That's hugely exciting as well. How strong is this team going to be, Millsy?
Look, at the moment, the squad that Ante is assembling, I think is, going to be more than competitive. And obviously, Ante is very much a student of the game, and I've known him for a long time through the national team, so I know sort of the way that he wanted to work, which was obviously very appealing, to myself, and the way that he wanted to play. And I think we've been fortunate. Obviously unfortunate with how last season and everything ended in the A-League, but fortunate in the sense that, we've maybe got that little bit more prep time, and being a new club, obviously it's come in very handy. So, look, so far it's been excellent. I think, we've got a lot of young boys coming through as well. We have a lot of experience there too, and just to see their development in the last sort of 2 months that we've been training, has been fantastic. And, I guess, again, sort of pushes the fact that to myself that, I'm so happy I stayed a part of it, because, you want to see, especially young Australians, get a chance and be successful and do well. I do genuinely care about the game and the state of the game in Australia, which is, again, while this decision was forced on me a lot, another reason that I did choose to sort of come home and keep playing.
So how encouraged are you by it then, as we get onto that subject? I mean, there's so much conjecture about where the game's going now and talent pathways and what position we're in. You've been involved at the top level for 20 years. How much fear should there be about where it's going? And is that an accurate representation of where things are or not from your point of view?
Look, I think in terms of that, there's definitely, we have a lot of work to do. And, in terms of being able to bring players through and develop them, because, it's never been a secret. There's a lot of kids that play the game. I think we definitely need to keep getting better at recognising that talent and being able to nurture it. And I don't think it's a simple fact of, one shoe fits all, I think. And that's very much the case we see when you're overseas. Not only are they able to sort of, I guess, bring the younger players through, they're able to recognise what they need at what times. And just the sheer number of teams over there allows them to get games, obviously, which is difficult here. Obviously, that's something that, the game's working to improve. But, I think it's, for a long time since I've come through, the view has always been that we should be stronger and we should be doing better. While there's still encouraging signs with the Socceroos, with players emerging like Awar and these sorts of players, I think, definitely as a nation, we should be striving to create more players and be more competitive more often. I think, the simple fact that our qualifying, the qualifying history over the last 10 years hasn't been great. And, we've been lucky that I think Arnie's come in with a real view to sort of improve that and obviously build on. And even the women's game, you see it's coming along in leaps and bounds, but we can't sort of rest. I think ever since the announcement that we're getting the World Cup and things like that, it's probably been a little bit quiet. And I know everything's a bit different at the moment in terms of with COVID and everything, but I really think that needs to be something that we really, really get on board with and drill home, because as we've said for the men's game helps the women's game, and the women's game definitely contributes to the men's game. And, we're starting to see that slowly, but I think we really need to push that home.
Well said. Thankfully, over the last 20 years, in terms of the national team, there's certainly been far more positives than negatives, and you've been central to them all. So we'll get onto that in a moment. But in order to get some context on all of that, let's go back to the beginning. Where did football sit in the life of Mark Daniel Milligan as a kid?
It was obviously at the forefront. I was lucky my dad played and my granddad loved the game, loved watching the game. He played rugby league growing up. But yeah, I was a menace at home. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, and my granddad copped a lot of the brunt of that. He spent a lot of afternoons down the park with me, and he probably regrets a few, especially as I was sort of getting a little bit older. But look, the whole football and my drive to play and everything, the large percentage of that came down to him and the way that he was able to nurture me in terms of a natural progression, I guess. The game was never forced down my throat, which I was, very lucky. I saw a lot of kids, or I can remember back a lot of kids, that were in a lot of sports it happens, that were pushed once that starts happening, you can go either way. So I feel very fortunate that, I was sort of guided through those younger years rather than, pushed into anything, whether that be representative teams or anything like that.
You mentioned your grandfather. There was a pretty poignant moment when Australia played Brazil in 2017, not long after your grandfather had sadly passed, and you were in tears during the national anthem. Just talk us through that relationship and I guess what it means to you now and what it meant through your whole life.
It was very important to me. Obviously, I came from, my parents separated when I was younger, and I spent a lot of time with him, and not just in a football sense. Obviously, he helped me a lot through school and things like that. So the relationship was always strong, and as I said, he had a great love for the game, and having a rugby league background, we sort of learnt the game together, I guess. He was new to it as well, so we had that connection, I guess, obviously being my grandfather as well, but that connection and that mutual love of the sport. So, that definitely helped. But I think just the sheer amount of hours that he put in, and as I said, coming up, I never made representative teams or anything like that. So, if I didn't have someone like him that was willing to go down the park and literally stand in goals while I kicked 8 balls at him, I don't know really where I would have ended up. And then, I was fortunate enough. He was always one at the games, and obviously my parents were as well and worked extremely hard for me. But I just I have a fond memory of how much he helped and how often he was there. And that Brazil game was tough because I lost him the day before that, and Ange was massive on family and that sort of thing. So obviously wasn't something I was going to miss, but you can't help. It's sometimes very difficult to separate those sorts of relationships from your work.
Great to hear. And I get the feeling your grandfather enjoyed standing in goals, having balls peppered at him as much as you enjoyed shooting at him. I get the feeling he would have loved the relationship as well, Millsy. When then, considering you missed representative teams, did the two of you, I take it, realise you were a bit better than the average player? When did it click that, hang on, I can actually make something in this sport? I'm a little bit different to the rest.
Look, to be honest, it was probably about 13, 14, I think, because, I used to play a lot of sports. I love sports and at school and stuff like that. And my dad was a very good cricketer growing up. And, I always wanted to play cricket growing up because obviously my father did. And I wanted to follow in his footsteps and things like that. But so in the summer, I would always play cricket. And then I was at Milligan Eagles in 13s and 14s. I guess that was it used to be the old Super League. And I remember we made the finals in cricket, and it sort of overlapped with football. And that was the first time where, the club and the coach really pushed. Were like, hang on a minute. No, you can't be playing cricket. You've got to come and play football. And that was the first time I had to sort of pick football over anything else. And I think the way that they went about it as well, and that was sort of the message. I guess I didn't really understand too much, but that was the sort of message that you really wanted. They want you there for a reason. So I guess that was probably the first time that I actually felt like, I guess there was the start of a pathway to a career in the sport.
The position conundrum you've had all throughout your career, midfield or defence, did that exist in juniors as well?
Yeah, it did. Obviously back in the old days, I used to play a lot at the old sweeper.
Yeah.
That sort of free roll at the back. And then, the only reason I sort of went into midfield when I was younger was because Milligan Eagles used to be in the old state league. And obviously I wasn't the biggest of players coming through. And they brought me into the first team, sort of quite young, sort of just after I turned 15. And I just simply wasn't big enough to play at the back, especially, the old state league and the old NSL and those sort of setups. It was very they're very physical and very demanding. So that's when I sort of started playing in midfield. And then I think it was Ange took me to an under-20s camp and played me right back. So I spent probably the next 5 sort of years at right back. So probably the first 3-4 years of my professional career, I spent playing right back.
So can we settle it then once and for all? What is your preference?
Preference is probably in midfield. I think that's where I feel now most comfortable, but that's just been because over the years, when you sort of look back on my career, that's probably where I spent the most amount of time. Look, to be honest, I like being central. So I'm very, very easy in terms of that. It was just sometimes used to get a hump when Ange used to try and play me right back again. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. I don't think I was ever any Ryan Grant in terms of getting up and back. So no, I really enjoy being, central in the park and feeling, I guess, more a part of it.
Is there ever a moment in your career when you were moved around so much that it actually did get to you, that you went, enough of this already? Like, I just play me in this position. You played me there for so long. Why are you moving me? Is there ever a moment where you almost semi-snapped because of it?
Yeah, probably early on at Sydney. And obviously back then it was a little bit hard because, we only had small squads when the A-League first started. And I can remember a period there where we went to Japan for the World Club Championships, and I played right back leading into it. Then I played centre back, and then I travelled to the Olympic team, and I'd played at centre back there, and then they'd had me in the national team, and I was training at right back. And there was like a couple-month period there where I didn't know if I was coming or going, and especially with the national team back then, it was so difficult because I was so young. You're trying to sort of make an impression, and as probably from the outside, it doesn't seem like that big a deal, but when you're getting sort of shifted from right back into the middle, and your awareness, and there's a lot of things that sort of come with it, and it's not just flicking a switch. So probably then was the hardest, because the coaches then knew that I could do it, and it just that was probably the only time it didn't really sit well with me. But as I said, I was young and used to get angry a lot.
Yeah, it's funny. I did a bit of research ahead of this interview, and I spoke to someone who said that you used to have a pump-up song when you were young, speaking of getting angry, but then you stopped having a pump-up song before games because it would lead to you getting sent off. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm going to blame Steve O'Connor for that at the AIS, because when I went down to the AIS on trial, and I ultimately it was a little bit of a lucky situation, really, that I got the trial anyway. I ended up getting in the team, and the first game, because I was a little bit small, he was always on me about getting stuck in and being harder. And if you want to play men's football, that's what needs to happen. And mind you, Steve O'Connor was one of the best things that ever happened to me for my career. So this is by no means me complaining. And training, obviously, we used to live together. So 16-year-old, 17-year-old boys, there's a lot of testosterone and a lot of stress. And, we used to get stuck in. And I mean, the first game I got sent off being about the 20th minute. And I thought not too much of it. And I came back, and he said, you're going to have you start on the bench this week. I'm like, okay, no worries. And then he brought me on in about the 70th, and I got sent off again. And then that was when we sort of had a discussion. He's like, look, I think maybe you're taking what I'm saying a little bit literally. So just need to back off a little bit. And then, ultimately, though, I think it helped me with my first deal with signing for Northern Spirit. So.
And it didn't trouble you too much in the early stages of your career, because when the A-League came about, you obviously did enough at Sydney FC to get a call, Mark, in 2006 to join the World Cup squad that Hus Hiddink was putting together to go to Germany for the first time for Australia in 32 years. You're only 20 years of age and one of only two players to make from the A-League to make that squad. Can you just walk us through that period, the moment when you found out you were in, and then the emotions that transpired afterwards?
Yeah, of course. I think obviously there was a long lead into that decision being made, and again, I think football is as much about moments and doing the right thing at the right time, and so like I sort of had an inkling that I was going to be involved in some sense. I'd come off a bad groin injury. I'd been out for, I'd only been back for not too long, probably 10, 11 weeks. And I remember just getting a phone call from Arnie, randomly, just saying, look, at the end of the season, I really want you to look into playing a few more games and staying fit and things like that. And I didn't think too much of it. So we organised, to keep playing I kept playing with Sutherland for a couple of weeks. And like I said, just it was more an inkling that you'd be called in to sort of train and things like that. And so I did that. And then obviously when I got the call about making the 23-man squad to go down to Melbourne, it was a little bit of I guess, disbelief. To be honest, I'd had a decent back half to the first A-League season, and then the call from Arnie. So I was only playing at Sutherland. I remember I was at the day before I left. I played at Lambert Park against Leichhardt with Sutherland, and then the next day I went into World Cup camp. So it was a little bit, very much surreal. And I'd not met the boys. I'd had a call up previously, but it was just as I'd done my groin, so I'd never actually been in camp with them or anything like that. And probably the biggest moment that stands out for me was the first day down in Melbourne, where they just he said, "You've just got a chance, so it's up to you now. You're here. If you want to go to Germany, it's sort of in your hands."
Can you remember any moments at that World Cup where it's such a unique environment? Obviously, I mean, everything's so confined and so intense, and there's so much excitement because it's Australia's first World Cup in so long. Can you remember a moment being in that squad around someone like Urs and around it Harry Kewell and a Mark Viduka and a Mark Schwarzer and so on, where you were actually gobsmacked? Is there a moment that took you back in terms of what was actually going on?
Yeah, look, to be honest, it was a little bit of a whirlwind, but I think probably the biggest moment was that when we went to Holland, and Harry came in a little bit late because I think they had Champions League commitments and stuff like that. And I remember being having dinner, I think, and when Harry came in, and obviously I grew up watching, as many Australians did, idolising Harry Kewell, and to take nothing away from the others, I'd been with them for a few weeks. And when Harry came in, I can't remember who I was sitting with. It might have actually been Meggsy with Beecham, and that was a very surreal moment because, as I said, that was the first time in camp for me. I'd had a little bit of time to settle in with your Vidukas and Cahills and players like this, but obviously when Harry came in the room, that was that was very exciting. It was a dream. That's when you sort of realised, I guess, the enormity of what was actually going on. And just to settle it all down, Gus took us fishing, so that just took us.
And then the euphoria of everything that followed and qualifying for the next round. I mean, you're 20 years of age. I mean, you've only been playing in the A-League for one season. I mean, that whole hype and I'm sure all the parties and everything that would have followed inside the camp, what was that like to be around that group when great things were being achieved?
Yeah, I think it was, extremely exciting, and, what a learning curve to be sort of thrown into, and what a time. As you say, we hadn't been to a World Cup for so long, and, to go into a squad of Australian players that were all at the top of their game, playing in top leagues, and, the quality on a daily basis. There was mornings that I'd get up and sit on the edge of my bed before, and firstly, I'd just be knackered and drained because we were training so hard. But then to think about what I had to go through again that day, just to be at a level close enough to, compete with them and things like that. So, it was not draining, but it was difficult. Yeah, but like I said, you don't get those opportunities very often, and not many people are given those opportunities. So, I think that Japan game, the first game coming in, and while all these players are there, and it's very, very exciting, but the first Japan game in Kaiserslautern, I'd never seen anything like it. You're coming in on the bus, and there's literally thousands and thousands of fans there, and mate, it still gives me goosebumps now. And I think that's where you sort of realise the extent of what was actually going on, because I was on the same bus as these boys going to our first World Cup game in 32 odd years. So that's that's probably the moment out of the whole thing that I'll remember most.
Unbelievable. And you were lucky enough to go to 3 more World Cups, and there's stories from them that I'd like to speak about as well. But after that tournament, I remember your career went on a unique path. You went on a number of trials in Europe, Werder Bremen, Arsenal, Man City, Metz in France. And I remember there being a fair bit of unrest in Australia about what you were doing. What are your recollections of that and sort of how it all panned out?
So that was, I think, mainly after the Asian Cup, which was in Thailand. And I'd been invited by Man City to go on trial, and that was under Sven. It was in the off season for me, so I went over and I was training with Fulham for a little while because Adrian Leia was there. Anyway, the Man City one I actually did very well. Sven was very interested. We spoke about contracts, and obviously Sven got sacked, which is always difficult. And then Mark Hughes came in, and that also went well. We spoke, but it was very difficult in England for me. And I guess, as much as maybe bad advice or a bad decision or things like that. I wanted to be in England. I'd been there. I'd done well. I felt that I belonged, especially when I was, trialing, training in Fulham and things like that. So I think just in hindsight, I was probably a little bit stubborn because it was so difficult with me with visas and things like that. We'd been sort of knocked back or denied our visa twice. You sort of get told a lot of things, especially when you're over there, that they can sort of work it out and move you around and whatnot. And you want to stay, and I guess you want to give it every opportunity. And that's what I felt. Obviously, you go a long way, and as a kid, it's a long way to go. You sort of want to get something for it. And obviously, the way things panned out, it didn't happen. And I ended up having to leave because I'd been there for a certain amount of time. My visa had been denied twice. So I was lucky I had a Socceroos game. We went away with that. We played. And then, when I came back, they basically said, look, you're going to have to leave the country for a while. You're out staying. So, and then that's when it got a little bit tough because I'd missed the start of the A-League season back here because I'd sort of been determined to stay there and work hard. And, that's when Asia came up. And then obviously Newcastle was a little bit of a filler to play some games. My agreement in Asia had already been decided. And, as a kid, I can't lie, when they offer the kind of money that they're offering and you're 21, 22, it's hard to sort of look at the bigger picture other than sort of what's in front of you.
That makes complete sense, and I wanted to ask you about that. But, that period when you were trialling, I remember it being reported here almost that it was being represented as if you were basically going from club to club on a whim almost, and that you were being almost not exactly fair to your clubs in Australia who had offered you contracts, who wanted you, and you were basically just taking any little trial that was being offered your way, which may not have been accurate. Did that frustrate you, the way that it was being represented here in Australia?
Well, yeah, definitely, because obviously there's always, another side to the story. But, like I said, my goal was I wanted to be in England, and like the Werder Bremen one and the Mets one as well were, I think they were between, so because Sven had moved on and Mark Hughes was coming in, I had a period where I needed to do something. I couldn't, so there was teams that were interested in, so they'd asked for me to come have a look while I was in Europe. And it was sort of the one where I felt that, so a lot of things were coming up and I wanted to keep doing things and experiencing things because I knew that if I came home, it was going to be hard for me again to, I guess, not motivate myself, but to get in that frame of mind to leave your family again and go and try again. So a lot of it was I was trying to give them time to work on my visa as well because I'd been made a lot of promises in terms of that being able to be fulfilled and things like that. So that was more the reasoning for staying over there. I was trying to, I guess, buy a little bit of time because of the information I was been getting. Look, in hindsight, you're a young man. People tell you things you want to believe them as much as anything, and that's not good, bad, or otherwise. And I'll never look back on my career and think that someone led me astray. At the end of the day, they were always my decisions. Yeah, and you don't always make the greatest decisions when you're coming through. You don't know as much as you do now, or I'm not going to know now as much as I will in 10 years. So it's just part of life, isn't it? And these are decisions I made. And, in hindsight, a lot of it as well was made because I wanted to stay in the national team. And the only way I could do that was if I was at least training at a high level. Yeah. And I understood that. That was the risk that I was happy to take, that I wanted to give it that period just to see where it lay.
But then you go to China not long after, which is not necessarily the highest level at that stage. And this is before the boom of big name players. But as you said, the money was amazing and too good to turn down. So what was football like culturally in China back then? And were there a lot of moments where you went, oh, this is not what's best for me right now?
Look, when we went over, I met them in Turkey in pre-season and everything was, it was very professional. We were staying at a wonderful place. The training was very good. We had some good foreigners there. The team was very strong at the time. We had a lot of Chinese national team players at Shanghai that year. They had won the league the year before. It wasn't sort of until sort of mid-season probably where I started to think, this might not have been the greatest decision. But that was only because we as a club were in Champions League, we weren't doing as well as they expected us to. They still, I guess I hadn't felt that before, the expectation that the club and the fans were putting on us. Obviously, the A-League when I left was still quite young. So the expectation on us to do well in Champions League, on us to do well every week. You get off a flight from an away game and the fans are waiting there, throwing things at the team because we hadn't performed to the way that they'd. And I hadn't experienced that before, especially at club level. So from that point of view, it was very good learning curve and to see how everything operates and things like that. But Shanghai, again, we had, I think it was 12, 13 training fields. We had swimming pools. We had our own rooms there. So in terms of the setup, again, it was something I wasn't used to and hadn't seen. So, and then, that got me the move to Japan.
Yeah, and that would have been a big one for you as well. And later on in your career, you played in the UAE and again in the Middle East. You had a lot of adventures there. When things get tough in those parts of the world, and no one would criticize you for this because you've explained why it occurs and everyone understands it now, but are there times when you just have to think the paycheck's just so good, you just got to grit your teeth and get through it when times get tough?
Yeah, probably later on that happened, but like with China and Japan, they expect a lot from the foreigners, and because, like I said, the national team always played such an important part in my game. So if things weren't going well, I was always determined to get out of that. Or if I'd been left out of the team, I was always determined to work a little bit harder because I always wanted to be in the national team. That was always my ultimate goal, to be in the national team. So I knew that if I made these decisions to go to Asia and to play in Asia, then, I had to be performing because, there was times Pim would come and visit and things like that and watch. And if he comes to Japan to watch me play, and also Pim had a big hand in me going to Jeff because of his relationship with people at the club.
Yeah.
So if he came to watch me play and I'm sitting on the bench or sitting in the stands, that's not going to do me any good. So I think especially those sort of periods, it was very, very much football driven rather than the money. I think later on, you use different reasoning and things like that. And obviously we had some tough times in the UAE and things like that. But definitely younger, it was definitely football driven because I wanted that national team spot.
Yeah. Interesting. And then you come back to Australia and you play for the Melbourne Victory, and that's without a doubt, Mills, the part of your career where you are the most settled. 4 straight seasons at the Victory. You win a championship there, Joe Marston medal, 3 A-League team of the seasons. What was it about that club? And I remember interviewing you shortly after you left the Victory to go to the Middle East again, and you got really emotional speaking about your time there. What is it about that club where it just clicked with you in a different way to perhaps some of the others in your career?
Look, to be totally honest, it was Ange. I had a brief spell with him in the under-20s, obviously a few years before that, and when I was talking, when he rang and said that he was going to Victory and really wanted me to come back and play, and that was I think the biggest thing for me. And then that year and a half that he was there, I think totally changed the way that I play, changed the way that I look at the game, changed the entire way I view football. And to this day, it's the same. So I think to be able to go back and have that sort of year and a half there with him, and then Victory, obviously the what comes with that, especially at that time. They have a fantastic chairman who's still there. Muskie I'd played against Muskie, and to have him there to come back to, I guess it was that side was a little bit comfortable and helped the transition. But I think when I was there and during that period, sort of when we succeeded, you could really feel that the whole club was succeeding. So that was probably what I guess settled me there. Obviously, Ange took me there, and then that was probably what settled me there. And I think obviously their fan base as well is is amazing.
And it was a high point of the A-League, of course, and things were pumping at the biggest club in the country. So no doubt it all seemed to go well for you there. There was one moment, though, when things got a little bit hairy, and that was when Crystal Palace came calling for you and put in a concrete bid, and Mila Jedinak was already there, so they're obviously going to rate Australian players, and you dreamed of playing in England. But the move never transpired. The victory blocked it, and Ange was pretty critical in, I guess, blocking that move as well. How frustrating was that period for you?
Yeah, very frustrating, because obviously the first time they came and they put in an offer, and I thought it was a no-brainer. I thought we'd be off to the Premier League, and I was at a good age. I just sort of turned 29. They'd made a good offer for me. A 4-year deal, which was excellent at 29 and stuff like that. So obviously when they knocked it back originally, I was a little bit surprised. I sat down with them, and we had a good conversation about it. Obviously, I had a good relationship with people there, and they explained the reasons to me, and basically told me to sit tight and it'd get done. So I sort of kept going about things. We had a national team game coming up and things like that. And then when the second offer came in, I thought it's definitely happening. I was basically told as much, and then I had to fly out to Brazil, still assuming that it was getting done. And then, there was, a few things happened, and they didn't agree to it. And probably the hardest thing was, at that time, for the amount of admiration and I guess how thankful I am of Ange for everything he did for me in terms of the way that I play and the way that I look for the game. This was probably a little bit tough, because he sort of said to me, look, if it doesn't get done now, it'll get done soon. You'll go, it'll get done. And then obviously that was the period. Well, it wasn't 2, maybe 3 weeks later, Ange left. So
yeah, right.
That was probably the toughest bit for me. That I guess I put a little bit of faith in someone, and not being let down, but look, it taught me a hard lesson in football late on. At the end of the day, people, they have their own careers they need to look out for as well. And at the time, me being at Victory was the best for people around. And then when the national team came up, it was obviously best for him to take that. So that's probably the only one regret, if I have any regrets in my career, that I wasn't a little bit stronger with that.
So did it affect your relationship with Ange then? Because he left to become national team coach and you were part of the national team. Did it affect that relationship at all?
Well, it couldn't, because, as I said, the national team for me has always been my driving force. It was always where I wanted to be. And look, at the end of the day, the first 6 odd years of that national team, while it was very good to be a part of, and that I didn't get a lot of football, there was a lot of people in front of me. I had to, it wasn't always easy to keep to a standard on a day-to-day basis, knowing that you're going to go to camp and you're probably not going to play. So that it's not always easy to keep that drive. And I'd sort of got to a period then where Holger had been playing me quite a bit. I'd pretty much cemented myself as a contender for a starting 11. I wasn't going to throw that away because I was upset of a decision that was made. It didn't make sense.
But the Ange would then, and we'll talk a bit about his time with the Socceroos because so much was achieved, but he also left again ahead of the 2018 World Cup when you'd all achieved so much together, and he made a call to quit the national team post before the World Cup. Did that frustrate you even more then? Did that really anger you and disappoint you, considering what had happened before?
No, definitely didn't anger me. It disappointed me because I thought that, we'd really been on a journey during that period, and, outside noise has never really been something that affected our group. And whether that was from when I first came in to the Socceroos to when I left, what people were always able to say what they wanted. It never changed the way that we felt or the way that we behaved or what we thought we should be achieving. So that was probably the only disappointing thing. But again, with football, people make decisions and you don't always know what's behind them or whatever. So look, I think we were at a point where I knew the team was going to it wasn't going to change too much because of that decision. You know, we'd spent a long time with him. The group was good. The group was strong. Not that it didn't matter who came in, but I knew that we were, as a group, would survive it, I guess. So it was disappointing to lose him because we'd done so much hard work, and I would have liked to see what would happen if, you know, it had have continued. But, I think in football as well, and I've learnt this, there's no point ever holding a grudge in football with anyone because, especially Australian football, it's such a small world.
Yeah.
You're going to cross paths again, and you know what? They might have done something that didn't totally agree with you this time, but next time might be totally different.
And you had some incredibly high moments as well together as a group, didn't you? I mean, that 2014 World Cup, firstly, where, you know, okay, the team didn't win a game, but you played a brand of football against expectations that excited everyone, and then 6 months later you win the Asian Cup. The feeling around that team then, Mark, over that 6-month period, how special was it? And the impact of Ange, considering where the team was not long before, how crucial was that to such an amazing triumph? Yeah,
well, I think it was funny because it meant a great deal because after Brazil, after the World Cup, I think we went a period of 5 months or something where we didn't win a game. We knew what was going on. You know, we're always training very hard and working very hard. And I remember there was a period we're in Qatar.
Yep.
We played the UAE and then we went to Qatar. We drew with the UAE and then we lost to Qatar. And I didn't play in the Qatar game. And I had a flight that night back to Australia. Anyway, at dinner, I think Milligan might have told this story before, but at dinner after the game, you know, we were sitting in there waiting for Ange to come in, and we thought we were just going to get, the hammering of all time. You know, it hadn't been we hadn't played well. We thought we were going to cop it at dinner, which, you know, did happen every now and then. So, and he walked in and he was very calm. And he basically stood up and spoke to us and spoke about the game briefly, as he always did. And then he just said, look, don't worry. He goes, I know the journey we're on. And he said, come end of January at the Asian Cup, he said, I can guarantee you, Mille, your skipper, will be standing there holding it up. He goes, you just need to believe a little bit now. So that in the lead up was, you know, obviously turned out to be extremely true. But that night, because I hadn't played, I went to the plane and sat in my seat, and it was one of the older planes, so the seats were very close together, and I sat down, and then of course Ange came and sat next to me, and no one likes sitting next to the coach on a trip home, and I just remember thinking, oh God, we've just lost, I didn't play, now I've got 14 hours sitting next to the boss. So but as I said, all obviously from then on things stepped up, and the Asian Cup was the Asian Cup on home soil, and was amazing.
Do you think that triumph gets enough credit? Like, there can be so much doom and gloom in Australian football sometimes, and especially during COVID when everyone had a lot of time off and there were sort of deep reflections on the game. I remember thinking a few times, have we almost forgot that we won the Asian Cup 5 years ago? Like, we might not be the golden generation, but things have been achieved that should be reflected on with a bit more positivity. Do you feel that as someone who was part of that group that won it, that maybe it's not looked upon as fondly as it should be?
Yeah, 100%. Maybe not even looked upon as fondly, but I really think we missed a trick there, and I don't think we were able to capitalise on that. I mean, I remember that A-League year as well was extremely strong. I know we did very well. It was a year we won it with Melbourne, but it was very close. You know, we've just come off winning the Asian Cup in front of 94,000 people in Sydney. We played at Amy Park, which was sold out. Thousands of people outside as well, and I think that whole sort of period, that 6-month period where the A-League was flying, we had some wonderful players here in the country playing, won the Asian Cup, and I think we really missed a chance to really push and capitalise on that. And, you know, obviously we want the game to get better, but I think since then, obviously, it's sort of just trickled along a little bit. And I think that's the more disappointing thing. You know, I think we should be a lot further ahead right now because of the lead up to that Asian Cup and the Asian Cup and that year and the way the A-League was going. So that's probably the biggest disappointing thing that I see in terms of our game and that year in particular.
Yeah, fair call. So you've spoken about what the national team means to you, and that's been pretty evident throughout this chat. being told you are the permanent captain of the national team then, when Graham Arnold comes in and Mila Jedinak's retired, the emotions of that, was that something completely different altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. I was fortunate enough to captain the team, on the odd occasion, and the Confederations Cup and things like that. But it's the greatest honour you can receive in playing for your national team, to be given the captaincy permanently, and it's difficult not to really be excited by that and responsibility that comes with that. And it was a good period as well, leading into an Asian Cup, and so it was a big time in the game as well. And it was, to be totally honest, it was a little bit unexpected. Obviously, I knew Arnie was looking to bring through that next generation, and so for him to do that, and I think I'd had a long relationship with Arnie, obviously starting way back in 2005 with the 2006 World Cup. So for him to do that and to give me that honour was, it was very exciting, and I'm very appreciative to him for what he's done for me as well.
How much of a culture change did you notice in your time with the Socceroos? I mean, we've heard, I think Mark Viduka came out recently and said that Asian Cup in Thailand, that there were players who were playing for themselves, and there were obviously big egos at times that dominated the Australian sporting media landscape, and then it changed a lot. So the culture in the dressing room, I guess, through that transition, how much did it change between those two generations?
Yeah, it did. Obviously, it did change a lot. Dukes is much better qualified to speak about it during that period, than I am, just as sort of a young fella coming through. But I think it wasn't a camp to camp sort of change. It was a trend through a little bit of time. Obviously, after the 2006 World Cup, the 2007 Asian Cup, and then leading into 2010, there was a big shift in the culture of the team. And look, not that it was bad, but early on we had a lot of very, very big players who, rightfully so as well, were sort of fighting for that, I guess, the title of the most influential or the biggest player. And I think that just over that time after 2007, obviously it shifted a little bit. Players became, were in different parts of their career, whether they'd been in 2006 or not. They'd all sort of got a little bit older. So, the way they did things had changed. And then, new players had come through, your Carl Valeri's, Brett Holman's, even Mille coming in after the Asian Cup. And, you could feel a shift in, I guess, the stands a little bit. And then, obviously a little bit more when Holger came in, and then definitely when Ange came in. It was all about the team. Was very much about performing on a daily basis, because that jersey, didn't matter who you were, was definitely not you didn't have the right to wear that. You had to earn it, and you had to earn it every time you stepped out onto the field. And that was probably when the biggest shift changed at that sort of last, I guess, 5-6 years. And, we saw a big change in the players coming through and things like that. So, like I said, it was definitely a steady shift in terms of culture, but, definitely one that, it happened as well because of, the players that were coming through, the places that were, you can't forget either, though, 2006 was so long in coming and happening, and those boys, the way that they got there and the way that they did it, they deserve to walk around, not just because of who they were, but because of what they had achieved, both at club level and for their country.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost excuse them for riding that wave, even if it did, mean that culturally something's got, a little bit skewed perhaps, but you can understand where they were coming from. So Graham Arnold's trying to establish a new culture now, and you've been part of that. The Asian Cup probably didn't go as well as you would have liked in 2019, all of you, but then he qualifies for the Olympics, so a massive tick for where things are going under Graham Arnold. What can be achieved under him? What do you think makes him a coach that can deliver something special for the Socceroos?
Look, obviously we had him in 2007, and I knew the way he worked and things like that. And, as players do, you learn and you grow in time. And, one thing he's always had that hasn't changed is he's very good. The relationship he has with his players and being able to bring the best out in everyone, all the players that are around him is definitely still there. And obviously tactically, he's come a long way from, sort of 10, 15 years ago. I think we've seen him do it in the A-League, and, we're seeing the rewards of that now with the Socceroos. And I think the only reason we're not seeing it with the Socceroos is because they haven't had a chance to play in so long. It's always a little bit tougher in the national team setup because you simply don't have enough time. You don't have as much time. You have to get your point across a lot quicker and a lot more direct. And, he has that now. Obviously, the Asian Cup was a little bit disappointing, but that was, I think, more about, a killer instinct rather than, a style or philosophy. And again, he only had a short time with us to implement that beforehand. So I think the more time that he's there in the job, the more you'll get to understand and appreciate the way that he plays. And, he has a great faith in young boys coming through, and he's definitely not afraid to give them a chance. And that's the only way you can continue to improve it at national level. You have to have players that have played national team games. There's no substitute for it.
Yeah.
Until you're ready to put them in, and it might be a learning curve at the start, but you'll see the rewards eventually. There's no point talking about it if you're not going to do it. Doesn't matter how many first team games you play or how many whatever games you play, until you play in A1 international matches. It doesn't mean anything.
Your move to Southend United at the end of your career, the season just gone, was a really interesting one. I think that took everyone by surprise. You had a pseudo coaching role there, so that was a big reason for it, I understand. But what's life like in League Two? It's pretty primitive at times, isn't it? I don't think people fully grasp just how tough it is at that level of English football.
Well, League One, they haven't gone down yet.
Right, okay, so you were League One, okay, sorry.
It was difficult. It was, I was sitting on a fold-out chair in a little brick room at the change rooms. And look, that move, obviously, I was extremely disappointed to have to leave Hibs. I absolutely loved Hibs. I loved everything about it. All the people there were wonderful. And I was very disappointed that, I had to move on. But that was purely a move made for after football. I waited so long to be allowed into Britain, into the UK. I was determined to make something of it. And for me, I sort of looked at it as, it was so difficult when I was younger. I didn't want to waste the opportunity now that I'd had it and I was older. And if that meant being able to prepare for after football and get something out of it that way, then that's what I was going to do. If I had to go and, really dig in and play a year, in League One and, do all the things that come along that, all the 45 odd games and things like that, then I was willing to do that because I knew that I'd make it work later on. And then obviously, I don't think anyone predicted COVID and the effects that would have on everything. And, while there's a lot of people, while the worst thing that's happened to me is I've had to move home to my home city and spend time with my family. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the world that have had it a lot rougher. So, I can't complain in that sense. But, in terms of, the move and the things that I went through last year in sacrificing and going forward, it's obviously very disappointing that, I went through that and I'm not able to sort of see the rewards a little bit later on.
Sol Campbell came in as coach towards the end of your time there, didn't he? What's Sol Campbell like?
Look, very, very obviously a fantastic career, unbelievable player. I found it very difficult under Sol. He made it very tough for me from the very beginning. And yet, I think there was only one game I didn't play for him. I still play every match for him. I think it's, like I said, wonderful, wonderful man. Good, good career he had. But I think it just proves a point that you can't transition from playing into coaching and just expect that it'll all happen for you. Yeah. And that's one thing I'm very lucky to see over the years is, the successful coaches that I've had and the coaches, that have, I guess, really left the mark on me are the ones that, their work ethic is so high and so strong. And there's a reason that they succeed. It's not just good old dumb luck. It's not just putting 11 players on the field and go for their lives. I think football, and I've seen that transition in the last 15 years, has changed a hell of a lot all over the world. And I think that's been one good thing of it. I've seen why coaches are successful, and I've seen why some are not so successful.
So just on Sol, sorry, how did he make life tough for you? Was it a personal thing, or just because the team wasn't going well and you just got frustrated?
No. The first time, the first game we had, played, no problem, and then I think it was the next game we had a home game, and obviously I was the club captain at the time. Which is something I didn't push for because I knew it would be, tough. It was something that was sort of asked of me.
Right.
And I did that. And then we were just getting ready for a game, sitting in the change room. And, just before we walked out, one of the other boys had the armband, and I don't make a fuss about things. And the kit man came up to me and said, "Oh, by the way, he's captain tonight." I'm like, "All right, no problem." And then I spoke to the assistant, Herman, and I said, "What's happening? Have you changed, And he's like, "Oh, he wanted something fresh, something different." And I'm like, "Okay, no worries. Do you think he could just come and let me know?" Herman was he's like, "Oh, he hasn't told you." And I'm like, "No, he didn't. So,
wow.
Just before he walked out, he called me into his office, and he was very cryptic about it all. And he was like, "Oh, I've just been busy," and that was sort of, I guess, the beginning and the end of our relationship, because it's not hard to come back from what he did. I think it's just hard to come back when there's no communication from the very beginning. I'm a very, very reasonable player, and I'm a very reasonable person when it comes to football.
Yeah.
Would have been, more than happy to sort of help him along however he needed. So I think it's just a communication thing, and obviously, when you start that way, as I said, it's hard to flip the tables, especially when you're struggling in the league and not winning games and things like that.
That's bizarre. So coaching then, it's something that obviously you're very focused on and you've already started developing in. Do you already sit here now and have goals? Do you sit here now and say, look, the Socceroos one day, that's where I want to be? How do you sort of work it out in your mind at this stage?
Look, I don't specifically that way. No, I just know that I have a great interest in the game and the other side of the game and how it works, and what different. I'm still very much obviously learning, and I enjoy that. And I was fortunate enough to I did my B license in Australia, and I was fortunate enough to start my UEFA over there, which again has been obviously very tough because of COVID. 4 a.m. Zoom calls is not that much fun, to be honest, but. I'm more, like I said, I don't have sort of an end plan in terms of where I want to be coaching or whatever. I want to be able to be a part of the game and be able to, I guess, help shape the way players look at the game. Similar to how it was done for me. The way that the shift in how I play and how I do things. I want to be able to pass on my experiences and my knowledge and see that change the game and see where that goes. I think especially in football, you never want to, well, someone always used to say to me, you never want to sort of put a ceiling on things, because why not? Why can't you achieve whatever? Why does there have to be a limit? And I think now that's very much the way I look at coaching. That if I educate myself with what I've learned from the game over the last 15 years, and because I've always had the interest, I've always looked at looked at the other side of it and how coaches do things. So what I've learned from that period to what I learn in the next 10 years, and how I'm able to help players and guide players, and how I'm able to, I guess it's just very interesting how much influence coaches can actually have on a match just by the way that they view it.
Well, mate, we can't wait to see how your career progresses in that sense and the impact you have with MacArthur on field. But I guess as someone who can perhaps chime in on the way the team is going with Ante Milicic as well from a coaching point of view, it's going to be hugely exciting. I love this chat, and I've got a couple of quick questions to finish things on, Mark, which I always enjoy asking of my guests. The first one is, and this is always one that I love hearing, and I know a lot of people do, the best player that you ever played with in your career.
Best player would, look, I think hands down would have to be Viduka. He was, I've been fortunate. I've played with a lot of players, but the first 3 weeks of the World Cup, I marked Viduka every morning, and it was torture.
He was intense because he often got criticised for being a little bit laissez-faire and cruising through parts of his career. Obviously, there are moments when he wasn't because he was just so brilliant. But that World Cup, he lost a lot of weight, didn't he? And he seems to have a drive about him that was different under Huss, and you had to bear the brunt of it.
Yeah, and I think people forget how big he actually was. He was a big man, and he had some of the fastest feet that I've ever come across.
Unbelievable. Best player you ever played against, and eliminate Mark Viduka there because training doesn't count, but best player in a game sense, world over, everything included, that you ever played against?
Well, again, I'm going to exclude Messi because I've been fortunate to play him a few times. And for me, hands down, he's the greatest player of all time. But, outside that, it's probably Fabregas. I thought Fabregas was outstanding, and his ability to find space where you don't think there is any. So,
was that the Spain game at the World Cup in 2014?
Yeah, and I played a couple of friendlies against him when he was at Arsenal as well.
Unbelievable. Fair way to finish, Millsy. Awesome career, just wonderful, and some really interesting stories there amongst it, and just hearing about how it all started for you and your recollections on the game and what you still want to achieve has just been fantastic, and I know people have enjoyed it. So thank you so much, firstly, and all the best this A-League season with Macarthur. We can't wait to see you stepping out on a pitch in Australia again.
Thank you, mate. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
That we will. Thank you, mate.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.